Good morning, everyone. We are excited to talk to you today about how we can collectively lower the burden on developers to create amazing web experiences.
Thank you. And I'd also like to add, we want to talk about how the work happening in the platform, driven by the collaboration of everyone in this room, is directly impacting the quality and the future of the web. And this collaboration is so core to the Chrome mission. So thank you so much for being here today.
I'm Stephanie. I am a PM at Igalia on the web platform team. There are some familiar faces in this room. I did work at Microsoft on the Edge team for 6 years, so I'm happy to see some of my old team here.
And I'm Penny. I'm a product manager on the Chrome Web Platform team working on UI capabilities. So the team works on basically pretty much everything that draws pixels on the screen. If it draws pixels, someone on the team is working on that. Something else I wanted to mention is I'm a little hoarse today, so you may see me taking lots of sips of water. I'm told that taking a sip of water on camera is like a power move, so you're going to be seeing a lot of power moves today.
So we are all in the service of the goal of giving users fantastic experiences on the web. This means pages that are modern, appealing, fast, and accessible to everyone. We want the web to be the easiest way for users to accomplish most of their digital tasks, whether that's through web UI or through interactions with AI and agents. Here's an example of a modern, appealing, fast, and accessible website in action. NRK is a public broadcaster in Norway. NRK, like most public broadcasters, has a stringent set of rules about browser support and accessibility and are held legally to the highest standards. They also want to keep their users coming back for content. NRK is not only using scroll-driven animations to change how they tell stories, they've built the infrastructure and editorial tools to do so repeatedly from their content management system. Some of you might recognize Adam Argyle's website. Adam is on the Chrome DevRel team and frequently features the newest APIs on his personal website. This isn't just a modern, accessible, and fast experience. It's interactively engaging in a way that gets lost on so many websites in the transitions. So how can we give users a fantastic experience on the web? An experience that is visually engaging, performant, and accessible to everyone. Even better if that experience can respond to our own individual preferences for how we want to browse. As browser engineers, we can provide that capability. But creating those experiences isn't always easy. Developers face a complex landscape. Our aim is to reduce that complexity and make it easier to build great things. I'm a designer with the skills to turn my designs into a web page. There are so many different things you need to consider. Layout, styling, interactivity, accessibility, performance, browser compat. These are all things that can present a problem depending on what you want to achieve. And the platform has an opportunity to reduce the overhead for developers when needing to worry about these things. So when it can inherently provide things like accessibility, performance, and interop, that's a win for developers. And there's no better example of where the platform is aiming to reduce developer overhead and improve web UI capabilities than with customizable select. Now, I started talking about customizable select almost 6 years ago in 2019 with Greg Whitworth at Microsoft. So it is a full circle moment for me to stand up here today and say, we finally have customizable select in Chromium today. For years, actual decades at this point, developers have struggled with the select element. Styling it consistently across browsers has been incredibly difficult, often requiring complex workarounds or rewriting the component from scratch. This was due to UI controls being tied to the operating system. Why would developers need to style the controls? The original thought was that they wouldn't or they shouldn't need to. But in asking developers what pain points they have, working with Select would consistently come up. This initial survey for JSConf EU attendees in 2019 had almost half of respondents say Select was the most frustrating control for them to work with. And then an even more recent example, form elements and styling appeared in the State of CSS survey as a top developer pain point. So how did we approach building a better solution for developers? By first asking them, what do they need from their form controls? And then working to find out what their biggest pain points were. Initial feedback from a JSConf EU survey sent to attendees highlighted why Select was the most frustrating control. Select requires hacky tricks, can't style option elements to the extent we need to, too little control over styling across popular browsers, the amount of work it takes to implement an accessible alternative with complete feature parity is massive. So from the responses, we identified developer needs like full visual customization, the ability to extend functionality of a control, out-of-the-box accessibility, and performance. The development of customizable Select has involved a lot of collaboration within the standards community. It's an iterative process that has involved framework authors and design system maintainers, independent developers, browser vendors, and multiple standards groups, starting with OpenUI and including YCG and the CSS Working Group. It has been through rounds of research, weekly discussions covering architecture, down to what something should be named. And when I say this process has been iterative, I mean it. Customizable Select has gone through an evolution of initially being proposed as keeping the Select element. And then we decided it should be a whole new element with Select lists. And now we are back and landed on just keeping Select again. Which gives us our initial result, a customizable Select that leverages the Shadow DOM to allow for complete visual customization while maintaining accessibility and the expected behaviors of a Select element. The current element does come with some limitations in that you can only create a single Select that is customizable, but multi-select is currently being worked on. And if I'm not mistaken, there is a session about that later. But as demonstrated by this demo, you can create a highly customized Select by leveraging the platform, finally. For these new APIs, being well designed is crucial. We want them to be easy to use, but we also want to prevent misuse. If you're familiar with the appearance property, it was misused as a hack to take control over form element styling, still leaving you with a less than desirable result when you tried to style a Select. We want to prevent that. With customizable Select, the new API ensures legacy Select elements don't break, while unlocking new capabilities by applying appearance-based Select. This opens a whole new world of options, no pun intended, for Select with even more to come. Now let's look at another common pattern that's getting an upgrade. Disclosure widgets, otherwise known as the details and summary elements. Developers frequently implement these using ARIA and JavaScript, rewriting from scratch for greater styling and functionality control. If you wanted to change the arrow that expands and collapses the UI, not possible. If you wanted to animate to height auto, that was also practically impossible. And as with Select, we wanted to really reduce developer burden while using the platform-provided components. We don't want developers having to rewrite entire pieces of UI from scratch to do something as simple as styling a component, and then having the added burden of making sure you've made it accessible, you've made it secure, performant, and interoperable across all the browsers. With details and summary, we wanted to add features that enable developers to use the platform. The implementation prior was difficult to work with due to underlying architecture restrictions and a lack of clear definition in the form parts across engines. Some of the features developers wanted for this component just weren't possible in the platform without rewriting from scratch. The improvements to details removed the restrictions on display properties, resulted in a new details content pseudo element that helps standardize the form parts across engines, and for easy animating, a multitude of improvements across various areas culminated in the ability to animate to height auto, a key developer pain point. It's worth noting the importance of a strong, well-thought-out specification from the beginning when thinking about changes to the platform. The history of touch action, for example, shows how a lack of clarity can lead to divergent implementations, creating headaches for developers. We want to avoid that by investing heavily in the specification up front. And if all of the work that is done up front, it ensures we have an interoperable set of improvements and new features for developers, instead of a set of features that need to be untangled and redesigned anew later down the road. This collaborative approach in the standards bodies is fundamental to achieving interoperability, and not just including browser vendors is the key to success. Ensuring individual developers in the wider community have a voice ensures the specification matches their expectations. And when we agree on the specification, we can build consistent implementations, as demonstrated by the progress we can see through efforts like web platform tests. And through initiatives like Baseline, which provide developers a clear and concise view at feature interoperability. It's easier than ever to distinguish which features are interoperable and available to use in your project today. So we've seen how these individual features come to life through collaboration and a focus on developer needs. Now Penny will talk about the broader impact of this work on Chromium and where we go from here.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. So we've seen how the individual features come to life through collaboration and a focus on developer needs. And I think I saw from the applause, I think many of you can appreciate just how challenging it can be to get some of these features through, and how much pain that they can cause developers in the meantime. So I'm going to be generalizing what Stephanie discussed to talk about the challenges of bringing a fast, modern, and accessible web UI features, and some of the lessons that hopefully can be applied to teams that aren't just working on web UI, but are working on Chromium, developer-facing Chromium features in general. So we saw some much needed new capabilities, and one of the reasons that this matters is that we consistently see in data that there's a gap between native apps and web applications. And so we want to think a lot about like what is causing this gap, because this affects the web community in a whole bunch of different ways. This affects the budgets that organizations give web developers to get the job done. It even affects the vision. If an organization does not believe that the web experience can be as good as the app experience, they're not going to build one. Of course, you're not going to build what you can't dream of. So it's so important that we understand what's still missing. Why is it harder to do some things on the web? And why are developers struggling? And we've identified some of those things like the customizable select or effective accordions. And these are core building blocks, core patterns that used to be very difficult and now are a lot easier. And devs here think that there's a problem as well. So this is from a DevSat survey that we ran last quarter. And we can see that, although there's general satisfaction, most leaders and developers still do think that there's functionality missing and that more is needed to deliver the highest quality experiences. So this is a fairly large end survey. And it is good to see that devs and leaders think more or less the same here. Like we don't see a large disparity gap in terms of their understanding of what the web could do. Like it might be a red flag if if leaders thought the web was much less capable than devs think it is. But it is concerning that a quarter of them think that there's important things missing and that it could be better. So quality of a website is actually quite a complicated topic. Quality can be composed of many different elements. Responsiveness, performance, reliability, consistency. I'm sort of showing a demo on the right of the Angular site that kind of gives this very app-like look and feel. The frame rate is high. It's using transitions between navigations. It looks and feels a lot like a native app. It looks like a quality website. Typically, website requirements also include things like compatibility across such a wide set of browsers that doing this kind of quality polish can be very challenging for developers. And there's all these competing concerns for a web developer. So they're thinking not just what can I do, but what can I do in a cost-effective way? What is going to be inside of the budget, and what is going to be supported by the web or by the user's browsers. So this all leaves kind of the matters up to the web teams, the design teams, in order to find the right set of trade-offs, and it is about finding the right set of trade-offs. There's a whole bunch of different ways that you can draw pixels directly to the screen. So hypothetically, a developer could build any experience they want with the web, and they've been able to do that for some years. The question is, can they build it affordably in the time span of the project and in an accessible way? And that's really where the rub comes in, is when you start putting all these pieces together, what goes into making accessible and customizable select is actually very, very complicated when you have to think about every sort of device that a user could be using and all of the different accessibility needs that could exist. So let's have a look at some of the differences that exist between websites and apps in the next few slides. I've chosen some big brands here that have well-funded web and app teams. And my objective is to look at the differences that may be a result of like a higher challenge level for building for the web. So I'm not picking on these teams. These are teams who have done great web experiences and great app experiences, and for whom skill is probably not the problem. So when there's an issue, it could be illuminating as to something that's underlying that's difficult on the web. So in this particular example, we can see, like with a page transition on the Airbnb site, that we kind of get a janky experience on one and not on the other. So like on the mobile web view, we kind of have this moment of kind of blank rendering, whereas in the native view, we've got kind of a smooth transition of one view coming over from the side. Here's another small but noticeable difference. See whether the video plays. There it is. Go back and do it again. Okay, so the first one. So on native, everything is very smooth. On web, when you click on the map, there's a sudden jump as it scrolls up to the top, and that jank it's very subtle, right? Like it's not a huge difference, but when you watch it, you play it a few times, the difference between the two experiences really stands out. And a user may not even be aware that they've seen this happen, but it is going to leave them feeling like one of those experiences is better than the other experience. Here's another example, and here I'm going to pick on the customizable select issue. This is a Starbucks app, and we can see that they've implemented a bottom drawer for the selection of beverage features on the right, whereas they're using the standard select on the left. And we have to think, like, if the team could have easily customized that, they probably would do something else, because the default select doesn't match the look and feel of the rest of their experience. It feels out of place. So there's also patterns that we don't see used very often on mobile websites that we see commonly in apps. Like one of those patterns is long press. So for example, on the mobile web here, we see that you actually pick from a menu, let's play that again, to access an emoji. Whereas if we were to go to the native app view, there's a long press that they use to trigger that. So a lot of these kinds of gestures, even though it's possible to implement them on the web, it can be more difficult to do so. We just don't see a lot of uptake of these patterns. And so we're working on things like interest invokers, which are a proposal to declaratively enable hover cards, rich tooltips and menus, similar to, say, the linear apps long press on the right. And in the current form of the proposal, the user could easily show interest in something, either through a long press or perhaps another action, in an element target by hovering with a mouse or by long pressing. This would be no additional code, and therefore we think it's more likely that developers will implement it for users. So to compete with apps, I think we need to do more than just build features. We need to build the right features and help developers discover and adopt them faster. Features don't help anybody if they're gathering dust. So to give you an example of a feature that launched in the last year or so, where we see some growth, but overall it's not affecting that many sites, is something like CSS container queries. We can see the growth curve, it's pretty good, but we're still only up to 0.02% of page views there. And how developers find features is they need to discover them, they need the documentation, they need the tooling, they need to know that it's going to work across all the browsers that they have to support in their browser support matrix. So having both the features, functionality, and ergonomics are important, but so is evangelization. But let's have a look at another feature with a very different adoption curve. This feature is when we can compare the :has CSS selector was adopted by the Tailwind CSS library. And it's up there kind of tracking at 39% of page loads. And it launched on a very similar timeline, not identical, but fairly similar. And so we see a wildly different adoption curve here. And when we break down the factors that can influence that adoption, of course, there is developer awareness. There's interoperability, but there's also ease of use. But the really big one here is adoption by libraries. That's an absolutely huge leverage point and something we want to think about in the development of features. How easy is it for any of the frameworks or libraries out there, especially ones that are widely used like Tailwind or React, to adopt and integrate that? So when we go into the data, we can find that properties that can provide a fallback are much more likely to enjoy rapid adoption. Now, obviously, like not everything can have a good fallback this way. So it's not always possible, but if a new feature can be defined as a progressive enhancements, then there are huge benefits to the uptake there. So for example, CSS Mask has enjoyed rapid growth and used as a shorthand, 90% of its usages have some sort of fallback. So we can see that this fallback has had an influence. I believe Annie's doing a talk on this later at the conference. So if you're interested in talking more about like the details of what's driving adoption of some features, that's a great session to go to. So how do we gather effective data? Stephanie already touched on this. For us at Google, for example, we do have a powerful internal mechanism, which is that Google has a lot of websites. We can go talk to the web developers internally who are working on those sites. That's great for getting early feedback on ideas. The one thing that I think pretty much everyone in this room has an organization where you would have a web team or multiple web teams that you work with. One thing I would say, though, is to be careful about not over-indexing on these internal users. Our web teams do support a very broad user base, but they also have very specific needs. So they're great for bouncing early ideas off of, but we also want to get out of the building and talk to other developers. So in terms of like the other way that we get a lot of data is by working with industry partners. So we want to hear from innovative partners that are interested in doing something special and different with the web and who are investing significantly in the web. That's often larger organizations like we are, for example, talking to Airbnb, who I gave a demo of earlier, and hearing from their team. And there are other teams that we speak to as well, just to hear what are they building and where are their problems and what's going on with them. And getting that kind of feedback is just hugely valuable to us. This does tend to be larger companies, but we're also interested in working with individual developers and smaller organizations like startups that are trying to innovate in very specific ways. Of course, all of this does depend on working together with standards. And this will be old news to probably the majority of you, but there are always new folks working on Chromium. Something to call out is the longevity of features in the code base. Things can hang around for decades, and getting it right is super important. And sometimes getting it right means taking a lot of time in the development. And that can be frustrating. I know there was some frustration with customizable select in terms of like how long it took from when the conversations began with it to what we got to today. But it got there. It did ship. We believe that it is going to be in a usable form that can work for another 20 years. And it took time to get there. And there's probably ways we can make that faster. But I think it's also important to understand that getting all the feedback and perspective to get to a good design can take time. And it's worth investing in that. In terms of how we get out and kind of talk to developers about these, of course, Google runs events like Google I/O and other browsers have other events of their own to kind of get the word out about new features. But I do want to call out that this is really important, and I think it's great that we do it, but it has limited reach because developers only have so many hours in their day to be out there watching content and absorbing new things. And that's one of the things that I see in survey data from developers as well, which is, kind of things are changing too fast. There's too much new information. And so we have these contradictory polls, right? We just got done saying things take too long. And then we have developers telling us things move too fast. And so we hear both of those things. And how do we make sense of that? Part of that is that we need to simplify what information developers need to hear about, and we need to get it to them when they need it, not kind of as like a blanket broadcast. One of the ways I'm thinking about this is what opportunity does AI bring? And love it or hate it, the majority of web developers are now using AI tools in some form in their coding. I pulled this quote just off of this website, but I believe it. Most developers that I talk to are using AI in some capacity. I expect this number to go up. So AI is here. It's here to stay. The question is, how can we use this to help us make the web better? So the advantage is when developers are using AI properly, they're getting more done with less work. And this is flattening out some of the disadvantages that are faced by small web teams. It does allow rapid prototyping of UI and other ideas. And it does allow potentially for more accessible markup to be made. It could also, of course, cause great harm. The average quality of a website right now on the web is mediocre. And that's what the AI is training on. So that's problematic. If we look at the AI tools as being, kind of great averagers, the average is not great. So the average quality of the output is also going to be not great. The question is, what can we actually do about that? You can kind of see here, contrast is a little low, sorry. I was trying to get Cursor to generate a Wikipedia article and use some of the newer APIs. Specifically, I wanted a tooltip using anchor positioning and popover. And what I found was even getting very specific and telling it what APIs to use, first, it didn't want to at all. I had to really persuade it to even try. And then what it did try, it only got it mostly right. And my conclusion from this is, like, as they stand right now, these tools are not useful for discovery. Like, they won't suggest to use a new feature. You have to know that that feature exists and be very specific about using it. That's not great. And we probably want to change that. So, if only there were some companies working on better AI engines. I think, the question for this room, though, is not about building the best engine. It's about what if we thought about this as a racetrack and not the fastest racehorse? And what if we had some way of grading the quality of front-end code, and then everyone who's working on these models, whether it's a general purpose model or a specialized model, can just run through the gauntlet, get a score, understand whether or not they're getting better or worse, and think about how they can change the training of their model to perform better. This kind of creates an environment that I think will most rapidly accelerate the entire ecosystem. So that's something I'm thinking about a lot right now. I don't have a concrete proposal for it yet, but I'd love to do a unconference session on this for anyone who's interested in participating. Just to conclude here, like, we do have billions of users, millions of developers, but we're all one ecosystem. That's amazing. There's nothing else like the web anywhere. There's nothing like this has ever been built before, or probably will be again. So we're all part of something pretty amazing. Thank you so much for everything you do. Remember to gather information from developers whenever you can. Make prototypes, get feedback, contribute to standards, and keep doing all the amazing feature work that you do. Thank you so much. Have a great conference.